Welcome to the online module for Educational Stability and Achievement Among Youth in Foster Care, Addressing the Achievement Gap. This module was developed by the Midling Project at the Center for Advanced Studies in Child Welfare at the University of Minnesota. This online learning module has been developed under Federal Title IV-E funding, Minnesota Department of Human Services, Contract Number 439481, the Center for Advanced Studies in Child Welfare at the School of Social Work in the College of Education and Human Development. This module is developed for child welfare workers working with kids involved in child protective services and attending school. This module will provide participants with several learning competencies. These competencies will be reflected in the brief quiz attached at the end of the module. Participants will learn about the current educational outcomes for youth involved in child protective services, or CPS. Participants will be able to identify various challenges and barriers surrounding academic achievement for youth in CPS. And lastly, participants will learn about promising practices and intervention strategies to promote the academic and social-emotional growth of youth in CPS. Let's get started. Research demonstrates that children in foster care are at a disadvantage in their educational pursuits, not only due to the negative effects of neglect, abuse, separation, and lack of permanency, but also because of the challenges they face within the child welfare and education systems. In 2013, 678,932 children were involved in screened-in reports nationwide to CPS, or approximately 4% of the population. The U.S. Department of Health and Human Services estimates that 402,000 youth nationwide are in foster care, roughly 5% of the U.S. population. The majority of these youth are school age. While Minnesota has the 8th lowest rate of foster care youth per capita, with roughly 2% of its population involved in foster care, the state has one of the fastest growing achievement gaps between youth involved in foster care and their peers. Compared to non-maltreated peers, youth involved in CPS score significantly lower on standardized achievement tests and are at least one half grade level or more behind in school. These youth may experience significant academic, social, emotional, and psychological risk factors that make educational success very difficult to achieve. So why focus on education? This is an especially compelling question because it seems like such a small piece of the puzzle. At bare minimum, we know that the majority of children and youth involved in foster care are school-age students. The U.S. Department of Health and Human Services estimates 62% of children and youth in foster care are school-age, similar to the 65% of school-age foster youth in Minnesota. In addition, some younger youth in foster care ages 0 through 4 may require early intervention services for a variety of needs, and these services are often provided through the education system. Educational support may also be provided for students with and without disabilities beyond 18 years of age. It appears that foster care youth, no matter what age, are being served in large numbers by the education system. Also, the federal monitoring system for child welfare is based upon 3 performance areas: safety, permanency, and well-being. One of the areas included in well-being is educational well-being. As such, we have a mandate to ensure that children receive appropriate services to meet their educational needs. For youth involved in CPS, education provides opportunities for stability and consistency in a child's life. Education may serve as a protective factor or a buffer against the negative effects of neglect, abuse, separation, and lack of permanency by providing a stable environment in which a student may improve his or her physical, intellectual, and social-emotional well-being. Although states do not uniformly report on the educational outcomes of foster youth, research generally supports that a key indicator of academic success is ensuring a child is placed in a stable, permanent home. However, the Center for State Child Welfare reports that approximately 60% of school-aged youth in foster care experience at least 2 placements or moves. These changes may disrupt their school experiences. So how can we support youth involved in foster care, and more broadly, youth involved in CPS? As child welfare workers, we may have a large impact on the educational success for youth in CPS. Both child welfare professionals and school personnel are positioned to influence the disparities in education outcomes simply by allowing for cross-system collaboration. Understanding and communicating the difficulties that youth in CPS face both inside and outside the school setting allows us to be influential across multiple systems. By collaborating with schools, we can ensure youth in CPS receive interventions, programs, and services that best fit their unique academic and social-emotional needs. But first, we need to understand the various obstacles students involved in CPS may face in the educational setting. Students in CPS face numerous barriers that make academic achievement increasingly difficult, including low enrollment in early intervention services, enrollment in low-performing schools, numerous school changes and school instability, service delays in receiving appropriate education, and compared to their peers, youth in CPS are disproportionately represented in special education, receive a greater number of disciplinary referrals, and experience low attendance rates. Let's spend some time talking about each barrier. Children in CPS who are at early risk for school failure, such as those with developmental or cognitive delays, have lower rates of enrollment in early intervention or early childhood education services that would help address these issues, even when they are eligible for such services. One study found that among all youth in CPS who were deemed eligible to receive early intervention and education services based on their scores on measures of cognitive, behavioral, and social skills, only 1/3 enrolled in such services. As such, children in CPS may be poised to fall into the achievement gap even before they reach school age. Another existing barrier appears to be that the majority of youth in CPS are enrolled in low-performing schools. Research suggests that students enrolled in low-performing schools fail to gain the skills and knowledge needed for success in life. These schools are often located in disadvantaged areas, are prone to overcrowding and student discipline problems, and have limited resources and insufficient facilities to meet the needs of youth in CPS. In one study of California youth in foster care, students in foster care were consistently more likely than the general population to attend the state's lowest performing schools and less likely to attend the state's highest performing schools. While about 50% of the general population attended schools in the lower half rankings, nearly 2/3 of youth in foster care attended low performing schools. This contributes to the widening of the achievement gap. Research suggests that lack of stability, including school stability, is one of the most serious problems facing youth in foster care. Numerous studies have found that youth in foster care frequently experience school change. One study found that elementary school-aged foster youth in the Chicago public schools were more than twice as likely to change schools as students who had no history of child welfare services. In a Midwest study of 17 to 18-year-old youth in CPS, more than 1/3 experienced 5 or more school changes since entering the child welfare system. Even more troublesome is the disruption that increased school mobility causes for the youth's transition into the school. For instance, the percentage of students leaving school mid-year is 17% for youth involved in foster care, compared to only 2% for youth not involved in foster care. These disruptions often cause youth to miss important concepts, feel ostracized from peers and teachers, and fall behind academically. With increased school mobility and high transfer rates, youth in CPS may experience delays in school enrollment. These delays are often caused by failure to transfer records in a timely manner. Records may be lost or take several weeks, even months, to process. For example, 42% of 8 to 21-year-old youth in CPS in New York City experienced a delay in school enrollment while in foster care, and approximately 50% of these youth attributed the delay to lost or misplaced school or immunization records. Another source of delay is caregivers failing to immediately enroll youth in their new school when they change schools during the school year. These delays can negatively impact the already low attendance rates of youth in CPS, and these youth may be enrolled in inappropriate classes or have to repeat courses that were previously taken. Delays may be particularly detrimental for youth with disabilities in CPS needing specialized educational services. Although these students are legally mandated to receive appropriate services in accordance to their individualized education programs, they may end up being placed in general education classrooms awaiting an educational evaluation, or receive inappropriate accommodations and services. In general, delays may also spiral the cycle of school disconnect, where students may feel disengaged and unsupported in their transition to a new learning environment. Youth involved in CPS are disproportionately represented in special education compared to their peers who have not been involved in the child welfare system. In one large city, students with a history of CPS involvement were 3 times more likely to be diagnosed with emotional disturbance compared to youth who were poor but had no child welfare services involvement. The stigma attached to not only receiving special education services, but also being classified with an emotional or behavioral disorder may result in adverse consequences for youth in CPS. Research suggests that youth in foster care receiving special education were more likely to be placed in restrictive settings than special education students who were not in foster care. These students may be treated differently by educators or feel ostracized from peers. Even more so, special education services for CPS-involved youth may not be equal. In one study, the individualized education plans of youth in foster care were of poorer quality and less likely to include goals related to post-secondary education or to the development of independent living skills compared to students receiving special education who were not in foster care. In addition, foster care youth with disabilities were less likely to have an advocate present during their transition planning meetings and change schools more frequently compared to students with disabilities who were not involved in foster care. Compared to their peers, youth involved in CPS experienced school suspensions and expulsions at a higher rate. In one academic year in the Chicago Public Schools, youth involved in CPS were more than twice as likely as their peers to have experienced at least one disciplinary code infraction. In a nationally representative sample of 17 and 18-year-olds, youth in foster care were over 3 times more likely to report having ever been expelled. The issue of disciplinary referrals is a multifaceted one. School personnel may be unaware of the students' involvement in CPS. They may not recognize that youth in CPS experience trauma on a disproportionate basis, and they may not understand the impact of trauma or adverse childhood experiences on student behavior. Failure to appropriately and adequately address the needs of youth in CPS often leads to emotional and behavioral problems that school personnel may be unaware of how to address. So they may resort to last method means such as increased detentions, suspensions, or expulsions. Such disciplinary referrals further reduce the amount of instructional time youth in CPS receive in the classroom, increasing the risk of school disconnect and falling into the achievement gap. A study of youth in Illinois who enter foster care found that 30% of 6 to 10-year-old children in foster care missed more than 10 days of school during the past semester, and some missed as many as 40 days. Poor school attendance was more prevalent for older youth ages 11 to 17. Even prior to placement in foster care, school absence rates are remarkably high. A study in Philadelphia showed that youth in foster care had an average of 31% daily absence rates in the 2 months leading up to placement. Why is chronic absenteeism an important issue for child welfare workers? Well, first of all, chronic school absenteeism in the elementary grades is associated with lower academic achievement in later grades, continued absenteeism in later grades, and eventual high school dropout. It is very well established that school attendance is critical for child well-being, particularly among youth in foster care. School also offers a safe, stable, predictable environment for youth involved in foster care whose family lives may be stressful or chaotic. And in some cases, school absenteeism may be a warning sign of related family risk factors and signal that things at home are not okay. Youth in foster care with high levels of school absenteeism may feel disconnected from their educational goals, peers, and teachers. Take a minute to reflect on these barriers and think about what challenges you have observed working with youth. Another way to think about these barriers is to look at the challenges and risk factors that youth in CPS experience through an ecological framework. Bronfenbrenner's ecological system illustrates how various contexts may influence our life development or experience, for instance, our experiences in education. For youth in CPS, academic problems rarely occur in isolation. Barriers to achievement exist among interacting ecological contexts. As you move further and further away from the youth nested in the microsystem, it becomes clear that youth are influenced by various interactions and systemic factors. It also becomes easy to see that multiple risk factors may interact and influence one another to make academic achievement even more difficult for students in CPS. It is important to take into account how different systems affect the academic achievement of youth in CPS because they spend a significant amount of time in a variety of systems, including their family, homes, schools, peer groups, and neighborhoods. To get a sense of the cumulative effect of risk factors associated with achievement, the majority of the barriers we just discussed fall into the first system, the microsystem. The microsystem is the setting in which youth in CPS directly interact with different people and influences in their family, school, peer group, neighborhood, and other settings. Youth involved in CPS may be affected by additional risks that influence their educational success at different systemic levels. Can you think of other risk factors that may serve as barriers to achievement within each systemic level? The cumulative risk of experiencing these barriers is outstanding for students in CPS. As a result, these students often experience poor educational outcomes. For instance, increased school mobility may be associated with lower achievement. A study evaluating academic performance of youth in CPS found that 75% of youth in foster care performed below grade level on statewide standardized tests compared to their peers. It was found that these youth were more than a year behind in early reading and math skill acquisition compared to their same age, same socioeconomic status peers. Further studies document that youth involved in CPS significantly lag behind their peers in early numeracy, language, and measures of academic and socio-emotional adjustment as well. Because early reading and math skills are important predictors of later academic and behavioral adjustment, these youth continue to struggle and exhibit difficulties in middle and high school. With each new school, there may be problems transferring records and credits, causing students to repeat classes or grades or miss education services entirely. One longitudinal study found that roughly 50% of CPS-involved youth had been retained in the same grade for at least 1 year. For youth in CPS, these disruptions may contribute to instability beyond that which is experienced through placement in foster care itself. Students may find it difficult to maintain relationships with peers, teachers, and mentors at each new school. As mentioned earlier, youth involved in CPS often experience trauma and behavioral or emotional problems that may surface in the classroom. These students are frequently suspended and expelled due to their classroom behaviors. Youth in CPS are also more likely to be represented in special education than their peers, and they're more likely to be placed in restrictive settings, experience stigma or differential treatment by peers and teachers, and receive poorer quality services than other special education students who are not involved in CPS. Research suggests that having strong student-school engagement has been found to increase attendance, school completion rates, meaningful adult and peer relationships, as well as academic and behavioral outcomes. However, youth in CPS who experience frequent school and home mobility may be particularly susceptible to facing numerous adjustment issues both inside and outside of school. Overall, they tend to feel less connected and involved in academics, extracurricular activities, and school organizations. The process of school disengagement may subsequently lead to an increased risk of early school dropout. Compared to their peers, the likelihood of dropping out of high school was twice as high for youth in foster care, even after controlling for demographic characteristics, school characteristics, and academic performance in elementary school. As a result, youth in foster care experienced one of the lowest graduation rates. Only 1/3 of Washington state foster youth who exited care at age 18 had a high school diploma or GED. This is particularly troubling considering the difficulties individuals who fail to complete high school experience. Despite the barriers and difficulties youth in CPS experience, a number of promising practices and evidence-based interventions for supporting youth's academic and social-emotional outcomes have been implemented with success. One of the earliest steps we can take is enrolling youth in CPS in early educational childhood programs. For those students who qualify for Head Start learning services, child welfare workers can help navigate the enrollment process. In Illinois, school readiness screening measure is required as part of the integrated assessment performed within 30 days of entering substitute care. Such screeners can help families and welfare workers understand whether the child may be at early risk for school failure and take action. As a part of a recent initiative, the Early Childhood Procedures in Illinois requires all children in foster care between the ages of 3 and 5 to be enrolled in an early childhood preschool program. Making enrollment in an early childhood program mandatory is another way to reduce the achievement gap and level the playing field when youth in CPS start grade school. Another promising program in California, known as the Education Equals Partnership, assigns an education liaison to the County Child Welfare Agency in order to ensure that toddlers and preschool-aged children receive the assessments and services they need. Through these efforts, the percentage of children enrolled in preschool increased from 42% to 59% over the span of 2 short years. Ensuring that child welfare workers are equipped with the knowledge of school systems and ready to advocate for young students may be particularly helpful for youth in CPS. Enrollment in low-performing schools is difficult to overcome for youth involved in CPS, and oftentimes, child welfare workers and school personnel have very little say in this process. However, child welfare workers can continue advocating for youth to receive services and education appropriate to their unique needs in whatever setting they may receive education. Educational stability requires extended effort from multiple systems, but it is the most important component of ensuring future educational success for youth in CPS. A national study of over 1,000 foster care alumni found that youth who had even one fewer change in living arrangement or school arrangement per year were almost twice as likely to graduate from high school before leaving foster care. The first step to ensuring school stability is knowing your legislation. The Fostering Connections to Success and Increasing Adoptions Act of 2008 requires child welfare agencies to have a plan for ensuring the educational stability of the child while in foster care. This includes having the child remain in the school in which the child is enrolled in at the time of placement, unless it is not in the best interests of the child. It is important to know and understand your state's legislation and policies supporting the maintenance of school stability. Another promising practice guideline is collaborating with schools and others involved in placement decisions. Oftentimes, educators are kept in the dark about any residential or school relocations unless notified by the social worker or administration. However, they may have valuable information for child welfare workers to consider when making important decisions about placement. Tools and checklists are available to guide child welfare workers, educators, and families when making such decisions. Once the youth is placed in a school, efforts must be made to ensure youth are enrolled quickly and with a smooth transition. Once again, it's imperative that child welfare workers know and understand the legislation and policies when school changes are involved. The Fostering Connections to Success and Increasing Adoptions Act of 2008 requires that the state agency and local educational agencies provide immediate and appropriate enrollment in a new school with all of the educational records of the child provided to the school. This process needs to occur in a timely fashion for all students, but particularly for youth with disabilities in CPS, as these students have additional legislative protections surrounding their special education status. Data sharing agreements may help facilitate the speed of enrollment. A recent amendment to the Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act, called the Uninterrupted Scholars Act, signed into law on January 2013, makes it easier for child welfare professionals to access the educational records of the foster care youth in their care. Some promising practices that allow workers and families to streamline the process includes allowing students to immediately enroll without requiring documents, creating timelines for prompt enrollment, and ensuring timelines are met for the complete transfer of school records. Enrollment transition forms may be utilized in order to facilitate communication between child welfare and school workers. In addition, some schools and child welfare agencies designate education liaisons to ensure youth in foster care experience a smooth transition to a new school. As mentioned before, youth in CPS with disabilities experience additional difficulties navigating the education system. The first step to ensuring youth receive the appropriate educational services is through screening. Screening efforts have been shown to increase the chance that youth in CPS with disabilities are immediately identified without any lag time and receive immediate assistance and services. Because of the unique challenges youth in CPS experience navigating both the special education and child welfare systems, Interventions such as the Take Charge program have helped youth in CPS with disabilities graduate high school or obtain their GED. The Take Charge intervention involves weekly coaching in self-determination and goal-setting skills, as well as quarterly mentoring by former foster youth. In one study of 16 and 17-year-old youth receiving both special education and foster care services, 72% of youth involved in the Take Charge intervention had graduated high school or obtained their GED, compared to only 50% of the control group. It's important that child welfare workers and school personnel collaborate to seek out intervention programs that facilitate educational success across all facets for youth in CPS, including academic and behavioral support, school engagement, and graduation attainment. Another promising practice for supporting youth in foster care with disabilities has been demonstrated through several states that have developed statewide surrogate parent programs. These programs are intended to train a pool of surrogate parents statewide to represent youth with disabilities in the special education process. Such programs may be particularly helpful for youth in foster care residing in group homes and other residential settings. Individuals may be provided to advocate for the youth during transition planning meetings and when setting goals for the student's individualized education plan. Many intervention efforts and promising programs have emerged to prevent serious behavior problems and decrease disciplinary referrals among youth in CPS. First and foremost, schools and school personnel should understand the impact of trauma and maltreatment on the lives and behavior of many youth in CPS. Many schools have adopted evidence-based approaches to develop trauma-informed school systems and practices. Schools that offer trauma-sensitive practices and supports incorporate an understanding of trauma into various facets of education, including academic programming, behavioral management, staff training, and the implementation of schools' rules and policies that are designed to reflect an understanding of trauma's impact on student behavior. Child welfare workers can help advocate for trauma-sensitive practices in the school environment. School personnel should also monitor disproportionality in disciplinary practices and referrals to ensure groups of students are not being overrepresented. Promoting regular school attendance requires collaboration between child welfare workers and school personnel. Establishing collaborative relationships and connections between schools and child welfare agencies is fundamental and can be done through a variety of ways. For instance, an education liaison hired by either the school district or the child welfare agency may serve as the person who oversees issues pertaining to CPS-involved youth in the education setting. A liaison works to promote the educational stability and academic achievement of youth in CPS as they navigate the educational system, and can be a source of much-needed support and communication between systems. Another way to foster connections is through the use of data sharing agreements. Several counties have already established data sharing programs between the school system and the Department of Human Services that enables child welfare professionals to access the educational records of the foster youth with whom they're working. One benefit of easy access to shared educational data is that caseworkers can receive an automatic alert when youth has had 3 unexcused absences from school. However, the most important piece to increasing school attendance among youth is fostering the students' connection to school by enabling them to have a smooth transition if enrolled in a new school, ensuring that they feel connected to at least one adult in the school, ensuring they have access to extracurricular activities, enjoyable peer groups, sports, and other activities, advocating for their academic, behavioral, emotional needs, and lastly, monitoring their progress regularly. So despite the barriers and challenges youth in CPS may experience, there are a number of promising practices that we can utilize as child welfare workers in order to promote their educational success. The Educational Stability and Achievement Among Youth in Foster Care, Addressing the Achievement Gap module is complete. Before you go, please consider the content of this module. Do you have an understanding of the current educational outcomes for youth involved in CPS? Why is it important to address the achievement gap for youth in CPS? What are some of the barriers or challenges that youth face in their educational pursuits? And lastly, what are some things you can do as child welfare workers to promote the educational success of all CPS-involved youth? The following slide contains additional resources to further your understanding about the education of youth in CPS.